Hello everyone and welcome to my Soap Twist 24 channel. I hope everyone is having a wonderful day. Before we begin, please hit the subscribe button and give this video a thumbs up. Thomas sat in the dim light of his living room, his diagnosis weighing heavily on him like a lead blanket. The doctor's words echoed in his head, crisp and unwavering. Stage 4 liver cancer. He hadn't sobbed then, not in the sterile office with its flickering fluorescent lights and the doctor's measured tone. He hadn't sobbed as he drove home, the city fading away in a swirl of red taillights and honking horns. But now, alone, with the peaceful hum of the refrigerator in the backdrop, the reality hit home. His hands trembled as he poured a glass of water, the liquid spilling over the side. He stared at it, his reflection distorted in the glass, and mumbled to himself, "I don't have much time." He was just 42. He thought he was too young to be sentenced to death. He was too young to be facing the end when his life had only just began. Thomas had always been the consistent one, the dependable friend who arrived with a smile and a plan. He'd constructed a life around simple pleasures, weekend treks with his dog, Rusty, late-night conversations with his best friend, Ridge, and the quiet satisfaction of his work as a carpenter, sculpting wood into something permanent. But now everything felt like it belonged to someone else, someone who wasn't staring at a ticking clock. Ridge arrived an hour later, his knock tentative, as if he wasn't sure he belonged in this situation. Thomas had called him earlier, his voice calm but empty, and asked him to come over. Ridge, with his broad shoulders and easy grin, had been Thomas's rock since they were children. They grew up together in a little village, two guys who shared secrets under the stars and swore to always look out for each other. Ridge had been there throughout Thomas's highs and lows, including his first love, heartbreak, and the day he purchased this home. And now Thomas wanted him for something more important, something final. "Are you okay, man?" Ridge inquired, going inside. He spoke softly and cautiously, as if he was frightened of damaging something fragile. He waited in the doorway, his jacket still on, his gaze searching Thomas's face for answers. Thomas nodded toward the couch, unwilling to meet Ridge's stare. "Sit. I have something to tell you." Ridge sat with his hands tightly gripped between his knees. He didn't push or fill the stillness with meaningless reassurances. One of Thomas's favorite qualities about him was his ability to simply listen. "It's cancer," Thomas eventually muttered, his words gushing out as if they'd been yearning to escape. "Liver. Stage 4. Ridge halted, his eyes widening for a fraction of a second before restraining his expression. He leaned forward, elbows on his knees, and exhaled slowly. "Jesus and Tom. So, how did this happen?" Thomas shrugged, a bitter smile forming on his lips. "Bad luck, I suppose. They discovered it too late. Nothing they can do now but make me comfortable." Ridge shook his head, his jaw tightening. "There must be something. A treatment, a trial, or something. We will discover it." "I'll help you, Ridge," Thomas interrupted him, his voice hard but gentle. "There is nothing. I have asked. I have pushed. It's done." The silence that followed was heavy and stifling. Ridge stared at the floor, his fists clenched. Thomas could see the fight in him, his resistance to accept reality. But Thomas had already fought that internal war and lost. "I need you to do something for me," Thomas stated, barely above a whisper. He leaned forward, his hands grabbing the armrests of his chair. "It is important." Ridge raised his head, his eyes watering. "It's my last wish." "Stop talking like that, Tom." "Don't," Thomas pleaded, his voice breaking. "Just listen." Ridge nodded, swallowing hard, as Thomas took a long breath. This was the moment he had been dreading since his diagnosis. The moment he had to speak the words that had been gnawing at his heart since he discovered the truth. "I want you to live," Thomas stated, his voice shaking. "Really live. Not just exist, not simply go through the motions. I want you to chase what makes you happy and alive. Because I can't anymore." Ridge glanced at him, his lips expanding and shutting as if unable to find the words. Thomas persisted, his chest tightening with need. "You have spent your entire life playing it safe, Ridge. You have a job you despise, and an apartment you can't abide. You're stuck and you don't even realize it. I'm not going to be here for much longer, and I can't bear the thought of you squandering your life while I'd give anything for one more day to do something meaningful. Ridge's face crumpled, and he rubbed his hand over his eyes, attempting to hide the tears. Tom, I don't know what to say. Don't say anything, Thomas interrupted. Just promise me. Promise me you will do it. Quit that job. Travel. Fall in love. Do something risky, something that worries you. Ridge took a nervous breath and spoke almost audibly. I don't know if I can. You can, Thomas responded firmly. You have to. For me. The room fell silent again, the weight of Thomas's words resting between them. Ridge looked at him deeply, and Thomas noticed a shift in his friend's eyes. It wasn't acceptance quite yet, but it was a beginning. Thomas's condition deteriorated throughout the course of the following weeks. The tiredness came in, a bone-deep exhaustion that made just getting out of bed difficult. His skin turned grayish, and his appetite disappeared. Ridge was there almost every day, bringing Thomas food that he couldn't eat, telling stories to break the stillness, or simply sitting with him and watching old movies like they used to. But Thomas could see the toll it was taking on Ridge. His laugh no longer reached his eyes, and his shoulders dropped when he thought Thomas wasn't looking. Thomas summoned Ridge one evening as the sun began to set below the horizon, coloring the sky in orange and pink. His voice had weakened to a whisper, but his eyes remained keen and full of fire. I'm not going to make it to Christmas, Thomas remarked, breaking the silence. Ridge flinched, but Thomas maintained his gaze. Do not argue. Just listen. I need you to promise me something else. Tom, please, Ridge begged, his voice full of anguish. Don't do this. I have to, Thomas responded. I need you to take Rusty. He's my family. I cannot leave him with just anyone. He trusts you. Will you take care of him? Ridge nodded, tears running down his cheeks. Of course I will. You know I will. And one more thing, Thomas added, his breath catching. When I leave, don't let this break you. Do not let it define you. You are stronger than that. Ridge swallowed back a sob and gripped Thomas's hand. I don't know how to do this without you. You'll figure it out, Thomas replied, a tiny smile on his lips. You always do. After that, the days blurred together, becoming shorter and darker. Thomas spent the majority of his time in bed now, Rusty cuddled up by his side, his faint whimpers the only sound in the room. Ridge came and went, bringing updates on his plans, small ones at start, such as giving his notice at work and scheduling a trip to a destination he'd always wanted to see. Thomas listened, his heart full with pride even as his body failed him. One night, when the anguish was severe than normal, Thomas awoke to discover Ridge sitting beside his bed, head in his hands. The room was dark, with the only light coming from a street lamp outside. Thomas reached out with his weak but steady hand and touched Ridge's arm. Thank you, Thomas muttered, barely audible. For everything. Ridge looked up, his eyes flushed and puffy. I'm not ready to say goodbye. You don't have to, Thomas said. Keep going. That's enough. Thomas went away 2 days later, in the early hours of the morning, with Rusty's warmth on his side and Ridge's hand in his. The chamber was peaceful, and the world outside was still sleeping. There was no dramatic farewell or last-minute admissions, just the slow fade of a man who had lived his life to the fullest in the time he had. Ridge fulfilled his promises. He took Rusty, the scruffy mutt that had been Thomas's shadow, and provided him with a loving home. He resigned his work, sold his flat, and booked a one-way ticket to a little coastal village he'd always wanted to visit with Thomas. He stood on the beach, waves pounding at his feet, and felt the weight of his grief shift slightly into something else, something that seemed like hope. Years later, Ridge would tell the story of his best friend, the guy who bravely faced his death and asked only for the lives of those he loved. He'd sit with Rusty by his side, now gray around the muzzle, and tell about Thomas's final desire, how it had altered and saved him. And in such moments, Thomas was present, not in body but in the life Ridge had created, the decisions he'd taken, and the love that refused to vanish. Thomas sat near the window in his father's living room, the autumn sunlight streaming in like pale gold. The trees outside were losing their leaves, their hues falling toward the earth in sluggish, almost reluctant spirals. He had always enjoyed fall, finding something poetic in the way the season combined beauty with grief. This year, however, the beauty only stings. He was 34. They claimed I was too young. Too young to be discussing the end. Too young to hear physicians tell him that his liver had betrayed him, that cells had grown like shadows on a dying sun. Too young to sit across from his father, Ridge, and admit what the physicians had already informed him in hushed tones. "Dad," he had said that night in the hospital room, "I don't have much time." Ridge gritted his teeth and tightened his grip on Thomas's. Ridge was a man who had created empires out of cloth and design, a man who fought love and family like they were eternal battles worth fighting. But in that moment, he appeared little and vulnerable. "Do not say that. Don't, please, son, don't." But Thomas understood. He knew as soon as he heard the oncologist's tone change from hopeful to cautious. He had noticed when the treatment ceased seeming like a fight and became more like a wait. He had known when he saw his reflection in the bathroom mirror, his body weakening, his face hollowing, and his once bright eyes dimming into something older than he was. The pain was not always sharp. Sometimes it was a dull ache, like a stone crushing against his ribcage, reminding him of what was going on. The feeling of helplessness was greater than the pain itself. The way the world appeared to continue on outside, with people laughing, falling in love, and arguing over inconsequential things, while his own time slipped away like sand between open fingers. He had one final request. Only one. That night, when Ridge sat beside his bed, Thomas spoke the words that would break them both. His voice was cracking and weak, but solid enough to hold their weight. "Dad, promise me one thing." Ridge leaned forward, desperate. "Anything, son. Anything you want." Thomas's lips quiver as he pressed them into shape. "Don't let me be forgotten." 5 words. That was all it took to break Ridge's heart into pieces he couldn't put together. "Do not let me be forgotten." Thomas wanted his son, Douglas, to remember him not simply as the guy who had been unwell or as a face in framed images, but as a father who had tried, loved, and given everything he had even when he stumbled. He wanted Ridge to pledge that his narrative, humor, and dreams would go on in the family. "Please," Thomas murmured again, "don't let me disappear." Ridge was unable to respond immediately. His throat tightened up. He averted his face away from the tears that poured, his powerful shoulders quivering as if he were no longer the pillar everyone relied on, but a man drowning in sorrow. Finally, he gripped Thomas's hand tighter and nodded. "I swear to you, son, you will not be forgotten. I'll make certain of it." Thomas smiled softly, though it cost him strength he didn't have. "Then I can go in peace." But peace did not come easily. Ridge kept hearing those words in his head for days thereafter. They resonated at night, when the house was quiet, and seared in his chest when he looked at Douglas, who was too little to completely comprehend. They haunted him while he tried to stay busy at Forrester Creations by sketching ideas that merged into meaningless lines. Thomas's health deteriorated rapidly. The hospital visits became closer together. The nurses knew his name by heart. His skin lost its warmth, and his voice softened, occasionally sinking into quiet when he was too tired to resist. But every time Ridge came by, Thomas would stare at him with the same plea in his eyes. "Don't forget me." Ridge started keeping a journal. He put down stories from Thomas's upbringing that others might forget. He used to run through the garden with disheveled hair and scratched knees, laughing as if the world were boundless. He stood boldly during his first fashion show, with his designs raw yet full of passion. The day Douglas was born, Thomas cried harder than the newborn in his arms, overcome with love he couldn't control. Ridge filled the pages with whatever he could recall, because he knew Douglas would eventually ask questions. Douglas would eventually want to know more than what images could reveal. Ridge had promised. He swore Thomas would never sink into obscurity. The night Thomas died, The world felt unusually silent. Ridge was by his side, holding his hand and uttering words he didn't think his son could hear. I love you. You are not alone. You'll always be with me, with us, Thomas said, opening his eyes one more time. He mouthed something too faint to hear, but Ridge knew. Thank you. The room fell silent. Ridge did not depart immediately. He sat for hours, staring at the silence that no longer belonged to his son. He reflected on their blunders, conflicts, and misunderstandings. He recalled the love that had always burned beneath, even when words were harsh. And he remembered those 5 words which would haunt him till his death. Don't let me be forgotten. The funeral was overcrowded. Friends, family, and colleagues gathered, dressed in black and carrying flowers to express their sorrow. Ridge stood erect, but his insides were crumbling. He told them about Thomas, not just his problems, but also his genius, generosity, and passion. He delivered stories that made people laugh despite their tears. Ridge felt the weight of his commitment as he watched Douglas staring at him, eyes wide and puzzled. Ridge then took Douglas aside. He knelt and pulled him close. Your father loved you more than everything in the world, and I'll tell you every tale about him so you always remember who he was. Douglas sniffled and nodded. I don't want to forget him. You won't, Ridge replied firmly, pushing back his own emotions. I promise. Time passed, as it always does. But Ridge honored his promise. He showed Douglas the journal, which he had been adding to throughout the years. He ensured Thomas's designs were maintained and respected in collections. He spoke Thomas's name at family gatherings, refusing to let silence erase it. He channeled his sadness into love, for love was the only thing stronger than loss. When Ridge was alone, he would sit at the same window where Thomas had sat, watching the leaves fall. He'd close his eyes and envision his son's voice, faint but steady, begging for the promise. And he would say back into the silence, You are not forgotten, Thomas. Never. Because some words last forever. And those 5, don't let me be forgotten, were the ones who transformed sadness into memory, remembrance into love, and love into a legacy that no illness could ever take away.